So thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. My name is Jessica Halsey with Addiction Policy Forum, and we're part of the NCHATS research project, and so excited for today's topic and our guest speakers. Our webinar, Enhancing Wellness for Criminal Justice Professionals, Innovative Programs for Law Enforcement Officers and Prosecutors. We've been really looking forward to having this session, and thank you for joining us. Next slide. So a little bit about our presenters today. So very excited to have two people I very much admire and are amazing leaders in our field join us. So Mary Ashley is the Deputy District Attorney for the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office. She's been a prosecutor with the San Bernardino District Attorney's Office since 1998. She's currently serving as the legal advisor to the civil grand jury and coordinator for the peer support team. She's the vice chair of the Prosecutor Wellbeing Committee at the National District Attorneys Association, and NDA is a partner with us on NCHATS. She specialized in family violence, including child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence, and as well as elder abuse. She's a board member for NDAA and vice chair for the Women's Prosecutor Section and the Wellbeing Committee. She's also a board member for us at Addiction Policy Forum and past board member of the Public Safety Peer Support Association. We also have with us today Domingo Jerez, who's the Director of Programs at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, IACP. His responsibilities include oversight of the association's work in the areas of highway safety, technology, mental health, children and youth, criminal justice systems reform, countering violent extremism, crime and victimization, police administration, data and information sharing, crime prevention, and police research. Domingo has more than 30 years of government and public safety experience in dealing with local, state, and federal policies. He previously served as the U.S. Senate confirmed director of BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, where I got to know Domingo, leading DOJ's largest funding and policy unit for state, local, and tribal criminal justice systems. Prior to this role, Domingo served on the Ohio Governor's Cabinet as the Director of Criminal Justice Services. He also served as the Director of the Ohio Crime Prevention Association. So I'm so grateful to both of you to be our guest speakers today. And I also have the privilege of introducing Dr. Jennifer Johnson. She's the C.S. Mott Endowed Professor of Public Health at Michigan State University. She's also one of the PIs of the National Center for Health and Justice Integration for Suicide Prevention, NCHATS. We're so honored to be a part of NCHATS and grateful to Dr. Johnson for her leadership. She is also the Chief Translation Officer in the Office of Health Sciences at Michigan State University and a professor of obstetrics, gynecology, and reproductive biology. She's also a professor of psychiatry and behavioral medicine at MSU. Jennifer is a licensed clinical psychologist who conducts policy-relevant mental health, suicide prevention, and maternal health care implementation and effectiveness research. So I'm so grateful to the three of you for being here today to really chat about an important topic. Anxious to hear our presentations from Mary and Domingo. I thought it would be really helpful. I'm going to hand the Zoom mic over to Jennifer, but to give you a quick little overview of NCHATS before we go into today's presentation. Next slide. So we're really proud to be a part of NCHATS here at APF. It's funded by the National Institute on Mental Health to test ways to reduce suicide among justice-involved populations. The center is meant to build information bridges between healthcare organizations and justice systems. And the problem, as you all know, is really significant. We have one death by suicide every 11 minutes in the US, and suicide is the 11th leading cause of death nationwide. Important research has come out that 1 in 5 individuals who die by suicide spend at least one night in jail in the past year, which means that arrest and contact with the criminal justice system is an important indicator light on someone's dashboard that they could use services and intervention and support because something might be going sideways in their life. So next slide, I'm going to pass the Zoom mic over to Dr. Johnson, but I'm so grateful that, that you all are able to join us for today's session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm just delighted to be on this webinar with our panelists today. So NCHATS, the National Center for Health and Justice Integration for Suicide Prevention, is a set of 8 linked projects nationally that prevent suicide along justice intercept. So this is everything from crisis lines, community prevention, police contacts, jail, probation court, all of it to try to prevent suicide. We receive funding from the National Institute of Mental Health. And like I said, it's 8 linked projects that are very pragmatic. It involves 2 of the largest suicide prevention trials ever, one including 45,000 people, to bring folks together across criminal justice, suicide prevention, mental health, community services, to prevent suicide. Braden, I have one slide I was hoping to show. Can I pop it up really quick? All right, let me just show you this. So this is a national multi-sectoral effort. We have more than 15 research and health institutions involved from all over the country. But I especially wanted to highlight here our consortium partners. We work closely with practice, policy, and lived experience partners, including Addiction Policy Forum, but representing suicide, representing jails, police, judges, attorneys, health, civil citation, substance use treatment, community health agencies. And we meet regularly with our partners so that they can tell us what they're seeing on the ground, what's important, and to help shape our initiatives and what we do. And one of the things they've told us multiple times is that they're worried about taking care of their own, because someone a healthy officer is much more likely to be able to respond better to someone with a mental health crisis, and suicide rates are elevated among, correctional officers, police officers, and others. And so they are both very interested in how to prevent suicide among those they serve, but again, want to know how to take care of their own. And so that prompted this webinar, and I'm really excited that Addiction Policy Forum has found such national luminaries to help give advice and answer the questions about how do people doing this important and difficult work take care of their own people. And with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. So I think we have slide decks for our presenters. So I'm going to move to Mary first, I believe. Is that right, Braden? I also wanted to, before I hand the Zoom mic, thank Braden Kelly and Marcus Rucker, who are on the NCHATS team and project for APF and work so hard and help set up today's webinar. So thank you, Braden and Marcus. So Mary, the Zoom mic is yours.
Thank you. For me, it's morning. I'm here in California. Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks to NCHATS, Dr. Johnson. It's intimidating going after a clear underachiever in life, Dr. Johnson, right? But I appreciate and the warm greeting by Jessica, and I'm honored to be on the same platform with Domingo from IECP. So this is just a brief snippet into kind of the prosecution world and working in the criminal justice field and how we've come to a space finally, and it's taken a long time, to where well-being, we consider it it's not an option anymore. It has to be something that is critical, that is taught, that is part of what we do in our occupations and our work. So go ahead to the next slide. It really starts, for me, and I know you know a little bit about me, it starts with our own self-perception. I think, like you'll find out with law enforcement and folks in this business, a lot of what we do is identified with our work and our identity. And so for many years, my self-perception was this, Lady Justice. And it meant working for almost a decade exclusively with sex assault victims and children and people who've had terrible things done to them, and you're meeting people at their worst, and they are hoping that you will provide them with some sense of closure and justice and help them to get to that next stage. And so for a long time, I did just that, but that became my entire identity. I was, in my mind, I was a child abuse prosecutor and a homicide prosecutor, and that's what I focused on. And it took a while and a step back after about a decade of doing exclusively that type of work, moving into the management side to see that I was definitely suffering from some secondary trauma, and it definitely inspired me to look further into this topic, and that's what I've been able to kind of do. Because while I did this work, if we move to the next slide, my self-perception really was something a little bit that looked like this. But if Braden moves to the next slide, I'll show you what I think most people probably thought I looked like. From my family and friends probably thought, because going to family events and holidays and parties and meeting people, and when they ask what you do and so forth, your mind is so focused on these, violent and graphic types of cases. You're just not fitting in. I started to disassociate with anything outside of my work, and it took a long time to get back to a happy face. If you move to the next slide, it took some time to really figure out, and I've heard this phrase used. I didn't coin the phrase, the cost of caring, but it's certainly one that I've heard throughout my career, as that learning about secondary or vicarious trauma, and it's not that, oh, we have the most stressful jobs. We do have stressful jobs. Everyone has stress in their work and in their lives. It's the type of stress and how we go on this hypervigilant roller coaster more often than maybe other professions. When you're exposed over and over again to the secondary events, more often so than the average person. The average person, isn't looking at child pornography all the time, isn't talking about human trafficking and looking at some of these things. And, we're not wired to see violence over and over again. And I never compare us to first responders, because we're not law enforcement and fire and EMS, but we're kind of the second responders. We pick up where they have to leave off and go to the next case, and we have to shepherd victims and their families through the system, and that can be difficult. And then there's compassion fatigue, which happens to many helping professions. It's not exclusive to us, where you still care, but you're tired. You get tired of the caring, and it can take its toll. And then there's burnout, to where you don't want to be, where you lose that caring and you lose that that investment you have in your connection with the career and the people you serve. And that's really the danger that we want to teach more prosecutors and criminal justice professionals to be able to avoid and handle before it gets to that level. So next slide. I know we mentioned National District Attorneys Association, which I'll talk about a little bit and what we're doing. But one of my colleagues, I serve on the Wellbeing Committee, and one of my colleagues out of Colorado, Michael Rourke, who's the elected DA in Weld County, put out a TED Talk late last year, and it talked about how lawyers can struggle with secondary trauma. It's been viewed on YouTube many times, and I've heard him present, and was really happy to see someone out there saying it, an elected official who's able to talk about and destigmatize the fact that he too encountered this after 25 years of doing this kind of work. And he really called for an institutional reckoning and a permanent shift for how we treat mental health for prosecutors, given we, like law enforcement, pride ourselves in being tough and being able to handle anything, and have to compartmentalize a lot, and don't want to show emotion, don't want to ask for help, don't want to be perceived as weak. And so he really was calling to shift the narrative on that and make it more than okay, and make it almost a norm, so that we're doing these check-ins and making sure that we're functioning at a high competent level when we're well. Next slide. So National District Attorneys Association did a survey last year we have a retention and recruitment committee headed by Joe Dallaire out of Alaska. And we did a study, and approximately 5,000 prosecutors responded across the country. And we wanted to find out, because like many professions, we're having a recruitment and retention issue when it comes to the profession, and making sure we're recruiting great people and people want to stay in the profession. And 93% of the respondents said they like being a prosecutor. And the reasons they became prosecutors is because they wanted to do justice for the community. They believe in the mission of the organization, and they wanted an opportunity to do trial work. And if we go to the next slide, What was a little alarming is even though so many enjoy their work, 57% responded that they've seriously considered leaving the profession. And you can look at some of the breakdown, whether it's the last month, the last 6 months, the last year. And that's concerning when you say, well, if you're enjoying your job, why is it you're considering leaving, whatever stage, beginning, middle, or towards the end that you are. And the next slide addresses what some of those reasons were, the primary motivators for wanting to leave. Now, 1 in 3, better pay and heavy caseloads is nothing new. I've, for almost 30 years been hearing, I want more pay and less cases. And so that didn't surprise me. But number 2 did surprise me, but it was pleased to see that it's becoming more of a relevant issue and it's being addressed, my own well-being. And despite these reasons for wanting to leave, people said they stay because they want to do justice for their community, they feel passionate about the work, and they still believe in the mission of the organization. So the next slide talks about how is well-being defined? And people talked about exhaustion, stress, anxiety, coping in unhealthy ways, impacts to my health from the work. And these are not, exclusive to prosecution work. They cross the board to lots, but the coping in unhealthy ways and the impacts of health is something that hasn't been talked about a lot when it comes to prosecutors and what that means and looks like to cope in unhealthy ways and not be okay and have it impact your work. The next slide. Is really the why. Why the survey? Why are we focusing on this? And how do then we address the number 2 reason people are considering leaving, the well-being? We want to increase, profession retention. It's important for the system to work, right? We need prosecutors, we need public defenders, we need defense attorneys, we need judges, we need victim advocates and investigators. We need these folks to make the system work in a balanced and fair manner. So, we want to increase that engagement and productivity for people. And of course, everyone wants morale to be good in the atmosphere, despite sometimes the negativity. And while there is a lot of, unpleasantness in the type of work, there's also a great deal of what I'll call vicarious resiliency. There's a lot of wonderful things that come out of serving others and helping people, even in their toughest of times. So focusing on well-being, enhancing the ability to recruit young attorneys into the profession is huge. Because right now you're kind of seeing a shift in a lot of law schools where I think a lot of students are told or taught that the only way to serve the public and to really see change and movement in the justice system is to go to the defense side. And while that's incredibly important and noble, and you absolutely can make an impact and difference as a public defender or alternate defender, there's really a lot going on as far as the prosecutors and the power and the discretion you have in making filing charges and making decisions on what's an appropriate resolution or plea bargain or sentence, or whether you should not file charges or dismiss a case. Weighing in, I mean, we've always been at the forefront of Veterans Court and drug courts and mental health courts and diversion programs and juvenile justice initiatives and where you can really help make a decision and that's going to in victims' rights on what's going to do the most good for folks. I mean, yes, there are very violent people out there and dangerous people who do need to be incarcerated, and that's a fact. But a lot of the people that are justice involved don't fall into that category. And so there's a wide opening there for exercise in discretion. And you want competent, sound people making those decisions that impact not only the victims' lives, but that of those that are involved and their families as well, and the witnesses and the entire process. So, recruiting those young folks is very important to realize what it is that we do, because there's a lot of, I think, myths out there that prosecutors only care about incarceration, they only care about winning trials, and that's our whole focus. And that's simply not the accurate portrayal. It may be in movies and TV, but not really. And then, of course, you have to focus on it because well-being ties into competence, it ties into ethics, and ultimately that connection that people have with their work that keeps them staying. While people say of course, we all want to make money and have good benefits, but that's not really what keeps you in places. It's that connection and value to the work. So next slide. Just as a brief, kind of overview, prior to 2017, there really wasn't a lot of focus at all in this area for lawyers in general. 2017, the American Bar Association released a report that says, hey, we need to do something about lawyer wellness, some training, some education, create peer teams. And now, at least in California, and I know many states, lawyers can get those credits that they need every 3 years for their ongoing training and upkeep of their bar cards and licenses for general wellness, for prevention and detection, which is very important because we know, if we get moved to the next couple slides, that there's going to be there's issues out there, right, with substance abuse and with suicide and with depression. So if we go to the next slide, it's important. We know that law enforcement has high suicide rates. So I know Domingo will talk about that, and health problems, and lots of divorce and family disruption and things because of the nature of the work. And so does the legal profession. There are also high rates of depression, alcohol abuse, and suicide. Next slide. Lawyer Institute for Wellbeing did some statistics about drinking, and a lot of the drug and alcohol abuse, right? Some of them are legal substances. Some drugs are illegal, some aren't, and alcohol's legal for those who are 21 and over, and yet those seem to be the dominating things that people are abusing. And it was, attorneys are up there in a study of suicide and having anxiety and depression and drinking, and so these are things that should be taken seriously and of concern for all types of professions, but particularly those that are the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. Next slide. The National Task Force on Wellbeing, so the ABA also did a practical recommendation. In 2020, they released a report that really hit to the heart of it. It's our ethical duty to be competent, and that's not just knowing the law and showing up to work and communicating with victims. It's being well to do so and being at your top and most capable physically, emotionally, intellectually, and doing that type of work. Next slide. Back in 2020, the federal government finally said, hey, they issued a report that recognized that prosecutors, investigators, and victim advocates were criminal justice partners who regularly are exposed to traumatic situations that negatively affect their resiliency. And that's become a key piece to what we're trying to focus on is, yes, some of the work's going to be tough, whether you're a prosecutor, a public defender, judge, but you can build up those resiliency skills and create strategies and do things that can help you adjust and plan and cope with these things in a healthy way and keep and sustain us to do the important work. And they identified peer support and mental health checks and education as tools that there should be resources for. Next slide. And then DOJ, or Department of Justice, they issued the practices to foster a culture of wellness and psychological health and well-being of law enforcement agency personnel, which we get lumped into sometimes as far as some of our staff are law enforcement. Clearly, we work with law enforcement a great deal. And they started to put out some grants. They put out some toolkits to deal with vicarious trauma and a lot of different research and recommendations to help navigate the field as it started to become a bigger issue to discuss and be accepting of. On the next slide. So I think about what we can do and some of the things that we have started doing in the last several years on a national level and in individual offices across the country. And that's the luxury I have of having so many colleagues from different parts of the country that have all different ideas and perspectives on things. And this was a tough topic to get going because most prosecutors have been doing this a long time, say, just deal with it. You got to be tough. That's the job. And if you're not tough enough, maybe you shouldn't do it. And the last thing we want to do is discourage empathetic, caring, ethical people from doing this work, thinking, well, it's just going to be too hard. It will be hard, but it has to. If it wasn't hard, everybody could do it. You have to build up those skills. So we try to think about, hey, can we create flexibility when it's possible? Doing a grind of a child pornography assignment, a crimes against children assignment for a decade can wear on you. Maybe that's not the best plan. Maybe people need to be rotated, cross-trained, provide different schedules and breaks so that people can rotate and not always be so focused, because that tends to happen. You get really good at something, you gain an expertise in it, and then it's yours for life. And when you're in it, you don't want to get out of it because you're really good at it and that's what you know. And it takes sometimes, well, let others help with the load. Let's train other people so that it's not just you always carrying that difficult and very narrow focused that is not what most of the world has to see. Teaching people to take better care of themselves, it sounds so basic. And it's like, well, how is that our responsibility? People are responsible to take care of themselves. That's part of being a grown-up. But it really, I mean, what is the harm in reminding people that they need sleep and nutrition and hydration, and how breathing can help calm you down and make your judgment better, and learning more about brain health and our central nervous systems. I mean, law enforcement does work that goes completely against that, right? They run to danger all the time, against everything our bodies are telling us not to do. Learning to set those healthy boundaries between work and outside life and family, and having those activities and friendships and relationships outside of work, and learning better ways to manage your stress. I mean, those are things that can improve anybody's performance in work. And utilizing peer support teams within our offices, or creating a relationship, which in our office we've been able to do, with an outside counseling service that is culturally competent for first responders, law enforcement. Many organizations have their EAPs, their employee programs for their whole office, their whole county, their whole organization, but they're not narrowly focused. And I'm sure Domingo will touch on this, to the special needs that go into what we do, that are different, that we see and hear things that are just different than the average person. And that's the nature of the work. And it's critical to have licensed therapists and counselors and peer supporters and people in that field that can be there to help support those who truly do need it. And I think more people are more willing to do that now than they ever were. And then being creative. I know a colleague in North Carolina who kind of turned a break room into more of a puzzle room or an adult coloring space, things that give people breaks. They activate the creative side of their brains. They're not just so focused, taking those times to do a little meditation, to do some extra exercise, those walking breaks, doing things that can help reduce that stress and break up the day. We have San Diego DA's office has an incredible program called Be Well to Serve Well. And amongst a variety of things that is included is they provide these two different 4-hour paid breaks so that people can go out and do activities, whether it's help clean up the beach, whether it's volunteering at a senior facility, different types of community or philanthropic charitable activities that they can do outside of work that help reduce that stress, make them feel connected, and gives them that break. And so I'm a big fan of the work that they're doing. Anything we can do to provide education and training on strategies, whether it's webinars like the things we're doing today, those lunch and learns, incorporating training day. I now talk to every new DA group that comes through our office and talk about our peer support team and what resources we have to counseling, and really trying to destigmatize the need. And I think that we're seeing newer folks that are much more willing to accept and expect that this is part of they're going to be their career and service than some of the people like myself that have been there a long time. Next slide. Briefly on peer support, it's really modeled after law enforcement and first responder programs. The substance abuse and mental health field has used peer. It's a little bit different. So peer support in our world is not quite the same. Peer specialists, I know in the addiction and recovery world, are often those who've had lived experiences who can then peer-to-peer share. It's a little bit different in our world, and that's not a requirement, but the same is true. Cops, they trust and want to talk to cops. The same is true kind of in our profession, and knowing that you have that confidentiality and that safe space of non-judgment to talk is a huge piece that we've been missing for a long time. And it's well known. It's not anything new that we created, in the diet and exercise, motivational team building. A lot of it comes from that peer base of that I'm not alone. I have folks that understand what I do, have walked in my shoes, and are there to help me. Whether I've lost a trial, whether I'm going through a bad personal issue, it doesn't matter. You have that support, and that's a big piece. Next piece, or slide. So here's just some resources that we use. We use the Counseling Team International. They're out of Southern California, but they go all over. Cop Line is a great free service for law enforcement. Those phones are manned by retired law enforcement who are trained. First Responder Wellness is actually a rehabilitative facility for treatment in Southern California that exclusively helps first responders, emergency personnel, where they're not concerned about running into people they may have interacted with at work or arrested or prosecuted. And I know there's others that are set up specifically for veterans. So, and then of course we have, we always want to make sure we train people on that 988 number and that there is help available to anyone 24/7. Next slide. NDA a few years ago had set up a well-being task force, and it was just the tip. And then each year it gained more traction, and more people were interested, and more people wanted to participate and share resources, and it became a standing committee. And I've been proud to be the vice chair. Cortico has a wellness app. Many law enforcement agencies use it. Our office has one specifically for our office and team. NDA members have access to one. There's lots of blogs and wellness articles. Some are, whether you're a member or not, some are for paid membership, but the committee has just done great work. We're now planning our 4th annual Prosecutor Wellbeing Conference, which never would have been considered years ago, never would have existed. Unless you're going to learn the law, there's really nothing else you need to know. And this has been sold out every year. And there's just been a growing number of people who want to go and learn, and we try to pick locations where you can actively go out and then practice those skills, whether it's in nature or on the water or with animals or exercise, whatever it might be. Next slide. This is just a little glimpse of what kind of our app talks about. It's confidential, it's anonymous, you can use it anytime. They have so many different tools on there for sleep and stress and nutrition and diet and exercise and finding counseling services and crisis services. So it's just a great thing to have. Next slide. A sample of those lunch and learns, just putting out simple things that people can scan, watch on their phone. Maybe they're out walking, maybe they're in their office, maybe they're at home, talking about burnout and dealing with difficult people at work and finding that work-life balance and understanding resiliency and building that simple topics that can make a big difference in someone's life, whether it's an hour or half hour. So next slide. And these guys, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our dogs. And so we have facility dogs, and we've had them for some time now that help victims, right? The most vulnerable victims, children and elderly who may be nervous going to court, who may, and these dogs are allowed to go in and sit with them. They sit at our assessment center when children are being interviewed, and they're fabulous. And we started to find over the years that our staff really loves them and loved when they got to see dogs, and the dogs made a visit at an office event or were walking through the building. And so we are in the midst and trying to get our own peer support dogs, so that, because these are working dogs, right? And they're tired after court and they can't be pulled in too many directions. And we've deployed them to other places with our peer support team when other agencies have need help, when there's national crises. We've had wonderful victim advocates that are handlers for these dogs, and they've done amazing work. And we find how helpful they are if there's a crisis in the office, if something's going on, or how proactive they are in just walking through and lowering people's blood pressure and changing the atmosphere and creating that positivity. And we know from the science, how animals can do that for us. So they've definitely been a fabulous resource for us. And I know many offices have them. Next slide. This is just a resource that a friend of mine wrote, Thriving Through Chaos. Kirsten was actually the initial chair of our committee, and she retired as the Missoula County DA in Montana and wrote this great workbook for criminal justice professionals, whatever side you're on of the coin, with lots of different activities and tips and exercises and things that people can do, whether it's journaling. It's just one extra resource that's out there. And finally, last slide for me, is, and I didn't coin this phrase, of smashing the stigma. I know it's an often used word and phrase, but it's true. I mean, if you can create an atmosphere, which really costs nothing, to encourage others to communicate, take care of themselves, prioritize their families and their well-being, that's going to be a better reasoned, rationed prosecutor who's able to make those important decisions and do so in a competent, ethical, fair manner. And eliminating the idea that seeking help is a weakness. I think that's just been a huge piece to our world. We encourage victims to seek help. to be resilient, to be able to repair lives. And we have to do the same thing for ourselves so we can continue to serve who are our priority, and that's our victims in our community.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was so helpful and amazing, and we're so grateful to the work that you do on your committee and in your this space sort of nationwide. Just so grateful for your presentation. And I hand it over to Domingo.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that. Mary did a wonderful job laying the foundation of what I'm going to speak to and some of the programmatic initiatives, plus a few resources to alert you to as it relates to this important issue. I think I'm going to go back to her first comment about self-perception. It's so incredibly important. Although I did really enjoy those two pictures, but the concept of that aspect of self-perception, because what we find, and then her closing slide about stigma, it's between those two areas, self-perception and stigma, that we really have to operate. Because if we don't break down the stigma of getting help, we're going to miss this mark. And when we look at where we are today, there's a lot of parallels. We do consider prosecutors as law enforcement, and so that's why you see the reference to cop line and the idea that separate line that people who are from that profession can get the support they need, and they definitely work with peers much better than they will without peers, people that they can relate to. But for us, one of the things that we really looked at in this space, and I'll give you a snapshot of the history of it, is trying to look at the three aspects: prevention, intervention, and postvention. And because all of the work somehow translates. So, for example, on this resiliency training slide that I have up, and we offer this resiliency training for officers around the country. When you look at resiliency, you have to ask yourself, okay, and you go back to Mary's presentation, when is resilience appropriate? In this business of law enforcement, policing in particular, we have 18,000 roughly agencies we speak to and 600,000 police officers out there. Okay, so how do we train all of them? And then you look at intervention and postvention and look at the three officers that just died in the line of duty in York County, Pennsylvania. The surviving officers from those agencies are going to have an incredible amount of trauma that they will have to deal with. People that they knew died in the line of duty. It's extremely difficult for them to get their hands around. So there's where we go into and say, okay, well, resiliency on the front end. So going back to the recruits, or when someone comes into an office, right? We're going to make sure we know about wellness and teach them about wellness, and financial wellness is important for a cop, sleep deprivation, nutritional awareness. Think of a police officer on duty in the 24/7 aspect of their profession. And if they're working midnight shift, you can imagine what they're eating. And it's probably not what we see today that is probably the most healthy for them. So we have to look at how do we teach resilience skill at the academy level, in our field training officer level, and then also all the way through retirees, because this part of resiliency is going to happen at different times in their career. The stress, for example, a retiree in law enforcement may have been a diver, if you will. And you think of the Texas situation, the natural disaster, the flooding that occurred down in Texas, and the officers and the rescue effort by EMS, et cetera, who had to pull bodies out of the water who had drowned. So many, the young kids from the camp, et cetera. And then they retire. And then what happens? They carry that stigma in their head. They carry those challenges, mental health challenges with them. And there's many cases in those situations where they leave 5 years after departure of the police agency, they retire, they find a sense of hopelessness, and the next thing you know, we have a death by suicide. And so we started this work in the prevention, intervention, postvention framework in the law enforcement community, right around the same time, 2017, 2018. We started to look at, okay, we need to do something with resiliency training. So we partnered with University of Pennsylvania. And the reason we partnered with University of Pennsylvania on their training is because they did it for the US military. And it had research. It showed how it worked, et cetera. We had to translate, working with University of Pennsylvania, to translate into law enforcement speak, if you will. So it would be relatable to those in the profession from a military speak. But we were easily able to do that. Again, help with the trainers from UPenn, and to be able to really look at how to manage stress, how to give those skills, how to look at optimism, how to strengthen the support networks. Everything you see on this slide, it became part of that training to establish resiliency. But the most important thing I want to pull out of this is that it occurs at the front end and then later on. You cannot stop when you're thinking of wellness. Now, the most encouraging thing we see today, and Mary talked about recruitment, retention, because retention is a different strategy today in our communities. And how do you keep people on their jobs? Yeah, the pay and the environment, et cetera, and those type of things. But wellness has really gained since that 2017, 2018 period a lot of momentum across the country as far as officers. And we've also seen it internationally. IACP is an international organization. We've done training on sleep deprivation down in New Zealand and Australia, et cetera. And we're finding that what officers are experiencing in the United States is exactly what we're seeing in Europe and Asia, et cetera. And so there's a lot we can learn from other countries as well, and I don't want to lose this. But an observation we've had recently, if you will, is this younger generation of recruits. This younger generation of recruits is different. I'm the old guy in the room, if you will, and have seen 40 years of this going around. Earlier in my career, dealing with suicide, if you will, in the profession, we just didn't talk about it. There was a stigma, as Mary mentioned. So we ignored it. We didn't really want to address it. The good news of where we're at today in society is that we now can, even as a society, discuss stress instead of just suck it up and do your job in any job. We can discuss stress. We can discuss mental health challenges. I remember the day then there was no such thing as an EAP program, let alone what we need today, EAP programs that really specialize in public safety professionals, prosecutors, law enforcement, et cetera, because the EAP that they need is much different than other EAP initiatives in governmental public sector service. So we have grown. We have seen younger officers paying more attention to nutrition. Why? Well, society is. It's following the trend in society, both with mental health, nutrition. We start talking about sleep. We start seeing people working out more, recognizing that if I want to live longer, there is a secret to living longer, and that is exercise, eating well, sleep, let your body recover, let your brain recover. We also see today technology has played a role in all this and helping us manage stress. Wearables, rings, watches, different devices people have that really monitor various aspects of our physiological framework that help us understand more. Apps like Cortico, apps to help with counseling, apps that help us monitor our activities, how many steps we get in a day, the exercise, our heart rates. These are all really important things. So the trend, it's a great thing. The trend is moving in a very positive direction. So I remain very hopeful as what we can see in trying to address these 600,000 police officers that are out there, and a large extent of the young ones who are coming in are going to come by this a lot more naturally than folks who have been on the job for a while. Next slide. So when we're looking beyond the resilience training, and I mentioned the York situation, we're also looking at how do you support growth after tragedy? Because, and this is another training program that we offer at IACP, because if we don't focus on post-traumatic growth, how to equip officers to process that trauma and look at healthy ways to move forward, the resiliency training won't matter. Okay, I'm resilient today, but what happens? My resiliency level goes down. So I'm going to use an example, COVID and our vaccinations. What do we find? We find take the first vaccine, or when you're a kid, parents get you vaccinated before you go to school. And what do you have? You have a booster shot. Well, that's what we're seeing the same thing when we're dealing with mental health issues. You need those booster shots. You need that reinforcement. Part of that reinforcement, yes, is peer support programs. Part of that reinforcement, absolutely, are things like service dogs. And I'm pleased to see that San Bernardino County has those, and certainly for the folks in the agency as well as for the victims. Just a sidebar note is IECP itself recognizing after starting this work back in 2017, we too as a staff need a service dog. And starting in January, we are getting our own service dog for our own employees. And so this is part of a trend, and it's a good trend. So the supporting growth after tragedy, and where we see this is after a mass violence incident, and unfortunately we have too many of those in our country. What do we do? How do we help the officers move forward? How do we, Lewiston, Maine, and we know so many of these, and Uvalde and school violence. You can only imagine what those officers are seeing in these mass violence incidents. You can only imagine what the officers are feeling in the situations where you had these line of duty deaths in York County, Pennsylvania. And that's what this is. How do we help those officers grow? So that's the intervention process, if you will. So next slide. Again, this is looking at how do we incorporate the recovery and growth principles into an everyday culture. Culture is really important. One of the things we're seeing in resiliency is even if we were to train 600,000 officers and those 18,000 agencies, you need to have the culture looked at. You have to create that chief of police has to create a culture of wellness if this is going to continue. I'll give you an example of where this has been so well received is in Tucson, Arizona, with Police Chief Chad Kazmar, who has said from the beginning, not only will we train our officers, we're going to do all these various things that Mary talked about and I'm referencing here today for our officers from the beginning to our retirees to create that culture of wellness. So the officers who come into Tucson know exactly we care about them. It's not just words, it's the chief living that principle and making sure that the investment, and it's a financial investment on the part of the city, that it's the most important thing that they can do. And so that's one of the aspects using looking at how to provide that support and making sure that the staff stay strong in the scope of what they're seeing on a daily basis. Next slide. One of the other areas that we see a lot of parallels with and was referenced is our family work. What are the family connections in this business? We find cops, firefighters, EMS professionals, they come home, they don't share. How was work today? Fine, fine, everything's good. Great, okay. And there's nothing else said. They're not going to relate, come back to their loved ones and say, yeah, it was really horrible. I pulled a child out of a burning building. I recovered a dead body. I had to respond to a scene, a traffic accident that was absolutely horrible, and folks were maimed or died. I'm in an investigation unit in anti-human trafficking. I see the worst. And so if we figured that figured out we need to connect the family. As Mary mentioned, there's a high rate of divorce in the profession. How do we address that? Well, we got to figure out how to equip the families as well. We had spent too much time just thinking of the officer. Now, I'm pleased to say we're looking at family wellness and how the family plays a role in that mental health aspect. An example I'll give you from years back, looking at bulletproof vests for police officers, looking at making mandatory wear policies. Officers were ignoring them left and right. They'd put them in their trunk and not pay attention. You know what we figured out? We figured out the answer to that was their family, their kids, trying to have their kids. We taught seatbelt usage and we taught our kids to wear seatbelts. This is way back. I go back in time when seatbelts weren't mandatory. So they're teaching in schools, kids wear seatbelts, and then the parent wasn't wearing a seatbelt because it wasn't mandatory. And then all of a sudden the kid says to the parent, Dad, Mom, aren't you going to wear your seatbelt? You know, Officer so-and-so taught us in school. Well, it is an educational process. So when we're looking at the kids in the bulletproof vest, we're the same way. Dad, I want you to come home safe. I want you to wear that vest. Okay, begrudgingly, mom, dad would wear the vest, the police officer. And it's the same kind of thing here, looking at the link between the stronger family and the connection back to. We've seen a lot of agencies do, family picnics, and what does that look like? What can you do with that? And this becomes part of it. Next slide. So the unfortunate nature is when we look at the profession, we do the best we can. We figured out, okay, exercise, sleep deprivation, nutrition, the things I mentioned, look at stress, well-being, service dogs, all of those things. Where do we come full circle? Well, we come full circle in looking at how do we prevent law enforcement officer suicide. There's been a time over the last several years that traditional line of duty deaths have been outpaced by law enforcement officer suicide. We need to, as it says on the slide here, break the stigma and build wellness. It's everything I said previously. So we created this law enforcement consortium focusing on just on law enforcement suicide, building a framework, trying to break down that stigma. What do we need to look at? Well, it wasn't just internally ourselves. We had to look at, yes, leaders, police leaders, line officers, clinicians. This is the most important part for us. Researchers, representatives from federal agencies, national organizations. But look at this next piece. Public health professionals, behavior health professionals. We can't do this alone. The expertise, we can do a training, as an example. The resilience training is 40 hours, 1 week. Will I make a difference in that officer in that 1 week? Sure. What is going to be the postvention? What's going to be the long-term ability of that officer to stay healthy, have growth, and stay well throughout the lifetime of their career, which tend to be at least 25 years, and then also in retirement? It's going to be the partnership with behavior health professionals who have studied this for decades and have masters and bachelors and PhDs and such, just like the partnership that NCATS has. All those organizations at the beginning are essential, not only just to keep the finger on the pulse, but to help us help ourselves. So we created this consortium that is a think tank, if you will, to look at all of these pieces, what's happening in this side of the world, and so to speak, the business, if you will, what's happening over here. And we also include Veterans Affairs, the U.S. military, Department of Defense is part of that, et cetera. But really to look at how do we build the collaboration, develop policies, and disseminate evidence-informed strategies, because if not, we will not impact this unfortunate growth in officer suicide. We think today it's somewhat of an accomplishment. We've started to track. So Congress several years ago required the FBI to make certain to collect data on suicides, and law enforcement agencies have to submit. So now we have more information and data points that we can actually look at than we ever had before. And that's incredibly important for research purposes, specifically on this audience. Maybe we can someday find out, even beyond the stigma, even beyond the wellness and getting help, but really focusing on trying to look at data and figure out, what is leading to some of these suicides, and can we prevent it. Next slide. Additionally, on this, the new piece that we're working on currently that's important to notice, because it's something that we never talked about, just like we never talked about suicide. ABIs, acquired brain injuries, are also known as traumatic brain injuries. We don't think about that neurological effect. And all of a sudden, whether it's brain bleeds, we saw a recent situation where you had in state police in Massachusetts, a academy cadet died from traumatic brain injury. We're starting to see both in our academy classes, what are you going to participate in boxing? What are you looking at as far as takedowns? And how do you practice this? How do you practice that? How many officers have had their head in a riot situation or just a takedown situation where their head has hit the cement or blacktop? And what does that mean? We've ignored that for years. Just like in the NFL had ignored for years CTI, and now it's like, okay, we got to pay attention over the last X amount of years. Law enforcement is doing the same thing for the first time, and we're extremely pleased with that. But as I mentioned before, it's going to take a leadership commitment. It's going to take peer engagement. It's going to take cultural change. And all of these have to come together. The stars have to align, as I like to say. Next slide. In looking at this, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of the biggest challenges we have in law enforcement is and I mentioned it before about the self-perception that Mary was talking about. What is that perception? Well, that perception tends to focus around my gun and my badge. I can't seek mental health help. I can't go see a counselor because if I go, then that counselor is going to give a report back to my police chief. And what about my fitness for duty? And then I got to see as they'll say, a shrink to figure out if I can go back to work or not. And they identify, they're so closely identified with their job, that badge, and their gun. The worst thing you can say to an officer is, while you're going through this treatment, I'm taking your badge away. Yet at the same time, we also know, as you see here, that the intersection with firearm access and safe storage is a huge issue for police and mental health, and certainly the suicide. We actually see an opportunity to create that most lethal means, putting it in front of them because they have it. So yes, there's safe storage, that's important, but it goes deeper than that. These are some gaps that we have to focus on. Discipline decertification, like I mentioned, the isolation, being ashamed of I got to get help. As society breaks down these barriers, and it's so important for us to support what society's doing at large with addiction, whether it's alcohol, drugs, what have you, we have to do the same in our professions. Last piece here, the breakdown of the family relationship strain. I mentioned we're doing some work on family wellness, but we need to develop more. There needs to be more integration between suicide, the work in suicide prevention frameworks, and into the family wellness aspect. They're all interconnected. Next slide. Community of practice. This is real quickly just what we created, allowing officers to talk to other officers. So there's a private online community of practice that we run that allows for departments and individuals to participate, share resources, because they want to share something like in San Antonio and Indianapolis, police departments where they have fantastic peer support programs. We're in a rural small department. How do I create we don't have the resources to create a peer support program. Can we create a regional support program? Who can help me create that? And that becomes a focus. So that's what the community of practice does. It literally creates an opportunity to share information amongst themselves, and it has made a world of difference. Next slide. So these are just a quick snapshot at IACP. You go to our website, International Association of Chiefs of Police, IACP.org. You'll find landing pages on wellness, landing pages on the nutrition issues and sleep deprivation. And I encourage you to look at it, the comprehensive framework for law enforcement suicide prevention. Go to these sites, take everything you can. We don't own it. We may have developed it. Most of it was developed with grant funds, but take it and use it. Translate it into the profession. Just like I said about the University of Pennsylvania training, we had to take it from the military mindset or the framework and translate it into policing. Do the same wherever organization you're from and take this. I always say steal it. It's okay, but it's not stealing because we're offering to give it away. But download it, take it, make it your own, take whatever logos off it, because we're all in this business. Yes, Mary said, what's part of our challenge with wellness? The passion that we see, the culture, the looking at the cost of caring, and she mentioned compassion fatigue. notwithstanding those things, if we can, if we can address those aspects, we're going to win this game. We're going to win this battle because we have to. There are lives at stake. Next slide. And finally, to share with you just this annual conference, not a plug for the conference itself, but the concept. Like Mary was saying, we too developed, this is our 5th year of doing this. We have an annual conference every year. Just to give you a snapshot of how it mirrors with society and mental health and addiction services, et cetera. When we started this conference, we said, well, let's just do somewhat of a symposium and a meeting 5 years ago. And so we limited it to 300 people, not sure how many people would come. We had 550 people who registered, even though we only had space for 300. So we, of course, had to scramble and figure out how to accommodate. Today, we have about 1,500 to 1,800 that attend annually. That's how much it has grown across the country. And this growth, the stake in the ground on the concept, we all have to make because it matters. These are, whether it's prosecutors or law enforcement professionals, these are caretakers to our communities, victim service providers as well, those folks. So anyway, it's important that we look at first responders, secondary responders, et cetera, and focus on their wellness and ultimately preventing suicide. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jessica.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Domingo. Thank you, Mary. Amazing presentations, and the work that both of your organizations are doing is just so critically important. So we're so glad that you took the time to spend a Friday afternoon with us to share all of your work. A couple sort of observations and a few questions. One of the things you both brought up in your presentations was really about stigma and the stigma around taking care of your well-being, mental health care, stress, and sort of all of these different components. Mary, you said that seeking help is not a weakness, and so many of these programs aim to sort of change our understanding that seeking help is actually a strength. So lots of progress through all of your wellness activities. And Domingo, one of your slides said, break the stigma, build wellness, and sort of how important that piece is. Also, just sort of a comment on what we know works to address stigma. Mary, I think you sharing I love your first 2 slides as well, and you sharing some of your own experiences of stress and challenges professionally and prioritizing your own mental well-being is so important. I can't imagine the stress of being a child abuse and a sexual assault prosecutor for over a decade. And you just sharing sort of your own focus and then helping other prosecutors in this space. I think that helps to break the stigma as well, because stories and humanizing and us all understanding we're all human and need to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. I just think that's incredibly important. So thank you for leading us in that direction, even at the start of the webinar. A couple questions I had. You also both mentioned the importance of peer support, right? And so, and both on the mental health and addiction space, peer support means individuals with mental illness or substance use disorders helping their peers and sort of that piece. But I've learned a lot from both of you. Peer support, law enforcement peer support, another police officer, prosecutor peer support, another prosecutor, helping peers either through day-to-day challenges or big events or processing traumatic experiences at work or whatever, it seems like a very wide range of types of topics that peer support can provide in both law enforcement and prosecutor settings. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how prevalent peer support programs are? Is there training by IACP or NDAA to help train peer supporters? Is there a lot of training that goes into this? I think our participants would be really interested in sort of how this is a real promising approach in both of your professions.
Sure, I can jump first. I know that Domingo will have a lot to talk about for law enforcement. It's becoming more prevalent. It's still new to a lot of prosecutors' offices. Like, why do we need it? We're not cops. But I know that, like, I've seen several offices in my state and other states develop them. They take time. It takes a long time to build trust. to get the right people in place, that people would actually say, this is someone I would trust and go to and want to talk and feel comfortable with and know that they have my best interest and they'll listen to me. Or, that the idea of giving someone your full attention and time is a big deal these days. And so I know like Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona, they have a very robust program. And I think they're probably one of the first prosecutor's office in the nation that I think hired a mental health specialist to be on staff, which
Wow.
I'm not aware of many others that have gone to that extent, which I think is amazing. So they're definitely popping up. I applaud Domingo talking about ICP. They have amazing resources. I've both taught and attended their conference, and they do I've talked about the laws of peer support, how to put good guidelines in place so that your team and office are protected as well and doing the training they need to do. So it's still developing, but I think people are becoming more aware of it. And instead of being something novel and different, it will be the standard of care and the expectation that you have these things up and running. So I know that we're not the only office. It's definitely becoming more prevalent, even if they don't have a team. There are a lot of offices that aren't big enough to have a team. They're small agencies. They're in smaller parts of the country, but just the training or having a bigger network of people that they can go to, like NDAA, like other prosecutor organizations that set up, like at our conference, there are presentations about how to stand up a team, how to run a team, what that looks like, the type of training, and how to network with others or partner with your local law enforcement or other larger counties with more resources to at least have access to that, even if it's not something that you're able to do. But 100% agree with Domingo that it comes from the leadership. And when you have support from the top, and that's going to be done in the office, that's going to be the standard, and they want to see that that's done successfully, it sets you up for great success in the future.
Yeah, and as Mary said, piggybacking on that, she's spot on. It's got to come from the leadership. We've seen that growth. She's right. We parallel NDAA in that. We've continued to see growth in peer support programs. Back in 2017, 2018, you didn't see a whole lot. You may have had one or two out there. And then you have agencies, the larger agencies like NYPD that employs a whole list of staff that are psychiatrists and psychologists, and their peer support program is huge, as well as their wellness perspective. So there's a lot we can learn. Like even on the suicide issues, NYPD does psychological autopsies. And that's not something that necessarily you're going to be able to do in smaller agencies. It takes, partnerships, collaboration, and certainly resources. The challenge for a police chief today on any peer support program is, where do I get the funding? This conversation today needs to happen with every mayor, whether it's the National League of Cities or the U.S. Conference of Mayors or International City Managers Association. It has to happen at that governmental leadership level, that local governmental leadership level, because whether it's a police chief or whether it's a prosecutor, county commissioners association, right? Those folks have to see the value in supporting the prosecutor and the law enforcement agency and allowing the budget for those type of initiatives and saying, we're going to make a difference for our folks. And it comes down to money and really providing those resources for the chief to determine. The chief, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. There's a lot they could do for their own culture without the funding. It's attitude. It's for example, what was mentioned, a police chief saying to the troops, I too have gone and received mental health services. That's important. It's an important statement for the troops, right? For the officers. So there's a lot they can do to help, but they're also going to need the help and the support of their local governmental officials.
Thank you so much. It's so helpful to have more context on peer support. We also have a question in the chat about any tips for rolling out the Cortico app for different agencies.
And I think it depends if you're in a large agency like Domingo's talking about, where they have the funding to obtain a license, because it's not free, but that they don't have as many challenges. For a lot of people who don't have the funding, it's certainly a challenge. However, Cortico does work with people on getting grants, on finding some financial aid, if you will, to set it up. We were extremely fortunate that our county had already purchased the license. So it was already being utilized by our sheriff's department, probation, Department of Behavioral Health, other entities that used it. And they were very generous in saying, of course you can use it. And we work with them to create our own specific piece of that for our office, for our peer support team. So piggybacking, sometimes doing a little research to find out if your county or agency or city or whomever might already have a license, might be looking at it, or maybe y'all can go in together on funding something like that, or looking at other resources to at least reach out to them and see what maybe they can do. And I'm not suggesting they're not the only app that's out there. There are other very, very good apps. It's just the one that I'm familiar with that I know lots of agencies do use.
Yeah, Cortico was the first app that came into this space, which was wonderful, and giving the ability to put you in touch with a counselor, if you will, 24/7. And that was really the game changer. Cortico does allow for a sliding scale for this based on the size of the agency, which is very helpful. But remember my previous comment, it comes back to that governmental entity, the bigger picture of the organization, where those funds come from, convincing them of the value and saying, you need to help us by investing in this software, in this app, if you will, so that we can keep our officers and our prosecutors healthy and safe. So yeah, that's and there are various ones out there, but they all operate in the same context and scenarios.
Thank you so much. Another sort of question, maybe a little bit more, Domingo, you mentioned in your presentation about the badge and gun question, so that unlike other professions, there can be real professional consequences by seeking mental health treatment or sort of reaching out. So if Braden, Marcus, and I, working for APF, reach out to EAP later this afternoon, there's not a professional consequence or sort of losing access or being on the job to in the same way. So are there jurisdictions or chiefs or counties that have done made progress in making sure that there are not those same consequences, which can take away some of those concerns that law enforcement officers might have in seeking help and treatment?
Yep. So I mentioned Tucson as an example. Chief Kazmar has done a wonderful job there, and I always like to highlight what he's done because he's transformed his agency from a cultural perspective. And there are others, but he did it as from the very beginning. And he also incorporated the 911 center. We forget about that. You can only imagine on a 911 center taking a call of a domestic violence victim, if you will. And so you have this individual, this partner that's physically abusing, and okay, I need you to get out of the house now, or I need you to do this, or police are on the way, or whatever that 911 call, and then something tragic happens. They too need to be addressed. And we can't leave out the public safety communication officers in this whole conversation because they too face it. So Chief Kazmar actually did that. He actually started as the commander of a 911 center there in Tucson. And so when he carried it with him, and more chiefs need to do exactly that. A large part of this is education. On that one slide, I talked about the gun. So yes, taking the gun is certainly something that departments are going to continue to do. The badge, is it really necessary to take the identity of the badge? Departments are saying now, nah, maybe not so much. The gun we get because of the safe storage and the link to deaths, et cetera, and the means, but what else can we do to that part of the stigma? And again, it's normalizing that stigma. That's the key here. So yeah, there are departments that have done that well. You also find not only that have done it culturally, like I mentioned Tucson, but then you got Indianapolis, I mentioned, with a strong unit, and San Antonio with a very strong, not only peer support unit, but as a, if you will, both as a mid-size police agency, not as big as Chicago, New York, LA, more of a mid-size agency. They've had a very robust program. And so they look, everything I've talked about today, they look at on a regular basis. If you think of having a commander of a unit like that, they get up every day, all they're thinking about is their officers and their mental well-being. That's incredible. And having a unit of multiple staff members, not one, not two or three, but multiple staff members, that's all they do. And assigning people to a district station, a wellness officer to a district station, et cetera. We're seeing more departments too bring in licensed social workers as an example and saying we want them on staff because they've had proper training. They can help us more than we can even help ourselves. That was my point of having psychologists, psychiatrists, et cetera, being part of it, which is a reason why at IECP we have an entire section of police psychologists and police physicians, because you can't try to be well in one space and ignore the other. You have to bring it all together. So hopefully that answers it.
And that's
Oh,
true too for what I love about having a link and a resource to therapists is, there's a legal privilege there of confidentiality, and people can contact them directly. They don't even have to go through peer support. And our office has no idea who's using it. It truly is a confidential system. They know if people are going, it could be client A, B, C, D, but it really is confidential, and people can utilize that and not have to worry who knows what I'm doing and who I'm talking to and what my issues are, because it is confidential. And that's a big piece.
yeah, very, very helpful. I have a question that came in from one of our participants, from Lorraine. Given the unique stressors that law enforcement officers, first responders, and prosecutors face, can you share some of the early or less obvious signs and symptoms that might indicate someone is struggling with their mental health, especially those that colleagues, supervisors, or family members might overlook?
Domingo, do you want to go first?
Nope, go ahead, Mary. I'll
I
answer
mean,
you.
I think there's some of the ones that we all know, that person who, used to get there bright and early and was up saying good morning to everybody and making rounds around the office, now just goes straight to their office, closes the door. Um, they're lacking interaction. They're coming back from court, and instead of, talking and sharing and, hey, you want to go to lunch and so forth, it's slamming the door, it's yelling, it's uh, unfairly unloading on colleagues, talking incessantly about their own personal problems, overburdening people who are trying to get their work done. And it can be the absenteeism, being late, being unprepared, dumping work on other people, because then you get to a point they're embarrassed to ask for help or admit that they're having an issue and so forth. Or just that person that is, you get the sense that is overindulging or misusing something, whether it's alcohol or something else. And that can be challenging for, I think, for supervisors, and to miss some of these things. It's like, well, they're having a bad day, or it's really none of my business. It's not work related. I can't involve myself in too much in someone's personal life if they don't want to. But I mean, simply just, how are you doing? You seem a little bit off. You're usually so positive. Is something going on? And just those simple little introductory conversations to show that I have noticed you, I do care. And you may get the I'm fine, everything's okay. But just those little pieces where you do take the time to ask and notice, and eventually maybe someone will say, this is what's going on. Maybe we can close the door and talk a little bit more about it. But there are lots of missed opportunities when you can see someone starting to go down that. Some people are very good at masking it, very good at hiding it until it's blatantly obvious and now a crisis. But you'll find in a lot of entities and offices, most people are like, oh, everybody knew, or, it was obvious to us, but maybe not to somebody else, because managers get so busy having to, put out fires all day long and triage. So it helps to have those peers and people who are really more alert and attuned to, hey, this is out of character. This person's not, they're not answering calls. They're not being as prompt to meetings. They're not participating. There's all different little signs and indicators that something could really be off. It could, be physical things, lots of weight gain or weight loss, or, just all different things that's kind of go, whoa, what's going on? It could be a good thing, but it could be a sign that something else is off. Or they just can't make time to talk or do anything. They don't, I'm busy, I'll give you a call. You never get that call, and it's that learning to help people kind of fill in those cracks and follow up with folks. That's the big, it's easy to just say, oh, let me know if you need anything, oh, hey, have a good day. And following up and listening. Yeah.
Yeah, Mary's absolutely correct. And the parallels are to society. So the warning signs, triggers, those type of things, the weight gain, the chronic absenteeism. Um, in our case, it happens more often where you're going to notice it is going to be in the locker room. You're going to see the person next to you. The key for us is for law enforcement, the other officer, if you will, to speak up. To if they're not comfortable talking to that officer, bring it to a commander level and tell them, look, I think, Jane is off, Frank is off, whatever the case is, make sure that someone else knows so that the department can do something. The other aspect, you gotta look at trends. Is it every night after, or whatever the shift is, after duty? I always go for a drink at the local bar. And how does that relate? And, from a coping mechanism, well, I need that few beers to unwind. Well, we know what a few beers lead to, right? And so those are also warning signs, that increase in alcohol or substance abuse that we have to pay attention to.
And I think that's a great point of now they're warning signs. Many years ago, that was the norm. That was really the norm. And you were the outsider if you didn't want to participate in those things or thought it was getting excessive. Yeah.
We're also changing the norms of speaking up and saying something, because whether it was mental health or someone's drinking, we've sort of been taught socially that these are don't touch topics, right? Or bad manners. And so starting to change those processes and make that the standard rather than something that is avoided, I think is so important. We have another question from Leo, really about therapeutic approaches or resources for PTSD or PTSI. I think we've touched on some of them, but Jennifer, you might want to weigh in here. But specifically on PTSD, is there different departments or agencies that are leading the way on this effort? Are there certain treatments or new treatments that we should be on the lookout for?
I mean, I think our panelists have covered it.
Yeah.
The question specifically asked about PTSI, which is more of the physical manifestations of trauma. Obviously, people mentioned alcoholism, addiction, work traumas, aches and pains, fatigue, mental health challenges can manifest themselves in a lot of physical ways. I don't know if Domingo and Mary, you want to say anything about how you see it physically with your folks?
Yeah, just to add to what you were saying, Jennifer, there's the direct, as you know, there's a direct connection between brain health and gut health. And we're seeing more of that and talking more of that. It gets a little bit beyond nutrition, but it deals with the brain aspect as far as the stress. Because, we're starting to look at, okay, how many folks in the law enforcement profession have IBS or IBD as an example? We're not really tracking it. We're not collecting that data, because what's happening here can also happen to the rest of our body, and trying to map that out becomes ever more important. We're not quite there yet. The thing that I'm also excited about from a profession, and obviously I'm here representing the chiefs of police, but the National Association of Police Organizations and the Fraternal Order of Police, two labor very large, probably cover between them the vast majority of law enforcement officers out there, are also focused now on this aspect of mental health and wellness. 10 years ago wasn't the case. Today, absolutely. They're all right there making sure that, okay, we need to address this. And the value to that is, again, I mentioned their labor unions, is collective bargaining. I talked about county officials, city officials, whatever. Think about the collective bargaining contract that can now have in it, because they're focused on it. No, we want as far as our bargaining agreement, a peer support program. We want X, Y, or Z. They can now get that because they're on board. And so helping lead that way is going to be very important in the future.
No, and I agree. As far as treating the injury, and seeing it as an injury, right? I know there's a lot of people that do EMDR, which I know that Domingo and Jennifer are familiar with, right? That eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and that's a specific therapy to deal with trauma and sometimes injury. But there's been a shift in how we look at brain injury and suicide, and there's been legislation passed that now treats suicide as line of duty death, right? Instead of some sort of other kind or shameful, that it's actually treated so that families can receive benefits, because that happens all too often. Well, it's not really a line of duty death. And they're looking at the injury that, if directly related to your law enforcement work, which 99.9% of the time it's going to be, you've experienced one of the criteria. And that's a big change in treating it as an injury.
Yeah, and speaking of that, that's the Public Safety Officers Benefit Program out of the Bureau of Justice Assistance at DOJ. And it also, it's injury and death. So, but that injury piece is very important and is a key factor that Mary was mentioning.
Oh, thank you so much.
And to the question about the resources, I mean, we sort of talked about them from a therapist perspective. I don't know of specific PTSI resources, but I would look into, there's some good resources for cognitive rehabilitation after traumatic brain injury. And if you treat PTSD, you're treating probably a lot of the PTSI. So I would start there.
Thank you. And we'll, with permission from Mary and Domingo, share some of the resources that they listed on their slides that I think would be really helpful for our participants too. So stay tuned for a follow-up email with lots of links and resources after our webinar today. Jennifer, any questions from your end or comments?
I just want to say how humbled and grateful I am to our two presenters for coming on today. We got posed this question and told it was a need. We're a national network of suicide prevention experts, and yet we don't.
Well, I think Jennifer might have frozen.
I'll just take her humbled comments. I think those were, she's too kind and too generous.
Oh, you're back. I think you're back, Jennifer. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we're so grateful to you both and to the nearly 200 participants that joined us today on this really important topic. I think that, as Jennifer mentioned, Dr. Johnson mentioned, we were asked to sort of highlight new resources, innovations, and how we can address wellness and suicide prevention for criminal justice professionals. And so grateful to Mary and Domingo and to all the work that NDA and IACP are doing in this space. We'll continue and maybe have another convening or topic among our consortium partners and make sure that we continue to share resources and innovations that are happening, and grateful to everyone for taking the time today. I think we're right at the close, so I'm ending right on time, so I don't lose my job as moderator or get demerits. But thank you all for taking time today.